we will officially begin today's series. We would like to start the series with an opening address from Ms. Nahee, alumnus of George Mason University, Korea, and the initiator of the project today's event is based on. Please welcome her to the stage with a warm round of applause.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming our CSPS-Korea Knowledge Motion Series, Refugees, Our Unfounded Fear. My name is Nahee. I studied Global Affairs and graduated from George Mason University in 2019. Being a student in this university is one of my delightful experiences. I met so many talented students and we share our knowledge together. And we have so many competent professors, so they gave us the passion and confidence to make our bright futures as a young generation. While I was studying human security as a concentration in the global affairs major, I had a chance to take a refugee class. At the time, there was a big refugee crisis in Korea. More than 500 Yemenis came to Jeju Island. So I thought it would be great to know about what's going on in our society. So I took a class. While the class ran halfway, I realized the serious circumstance of refugees in the world. Especially, there was a lack of public interest and information about the reality of refugees in Korea. I still remember the news that more than 500 Yemenis refugees came to Jeju Island, but actually that is not true. They are all asylum seekers and only 2 people could get a refugee status after a while. So I realized Koreans, we don't know the differences between asylum seeker and refugee. The refugee issue is a global crisis in modern society, and it will continue to be a major concern. And many politicians and researchers in foreign countries have been focusing on this issue, and now they raise public awareness about it. In this situation, I thought it will be great that we pay more attention about refugee era, so I decided to make Korean subtitle of refugee documentary that I saw in the class. This is Home, a Refugee Story. After I decide this decision, I contacted the director of this documentary, and in this process, Professor Yasemin and Professor Ryun gave me a lot of support. We decided to proceed this project with CSPS in George Mason University, Korea, and so many talented students did so many work for this project. I hope today's conference will be a great first step that we pay more attention about refugee era, and I would like to say thank you to George Mason University, Korea to help this project come out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ho, for your opening remarks. Now we will have our welcoming remarks from Dean Davis. Please welcome her to the stage with a round of applause.
Good morning. Let's try again. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. I am so honored and excited to be able to be here at the CSPS-K Knowledge in Motion series. I say this not only because of the distinguished guests who've joined us today, but also because as Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs, I'm excited that we are here in person. We are here in person at an event that originated as the idea of a student. This is what Mason Korea is all about. These kinds of events, dreams of students who have questions to be answered, problems to be solved. This is what we ask students to step up and work towards. Today, we are here to think critically about a symptom of global unrest caused by resource scarcity, political conflicts, and climate change. Refugee movement. This event, focusing first on a documentary but framed by intellectual dialogue, is the result of a now alumna asking questions and seeking answers. This is an example of how Mason Korea impacts students and how our students impact the world. And as Associate Dean, I am honored to be here, to be a part of today. I invite all of you to participate, fully participate today. Be present, listen, engage. What is known? What is unknown? What are the possible next steps, questions to be answered? And what is your role in answering these questions? How can Mason Korea, our faculty, our leadership, and our community support you as you seek to answer these questions and take your next step? Thank you to all who have enabled this event. Thank you to the participants for being here today. And thank you all for being willing to think about these next steps that need to be taken as a part of our global community. Welcome and enjoy today's series.
Thank you, Dean Davis, for your kind and welcoming remarks. Now we would like to invite IGC CEO, Dr. Yu, for the congratulatory remarks. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
Good morning again. It is my great honor to be speaking here today in this meaningful event, hosted by George Mason University Center for Security Policy Studies Korea 2021 Knowledge in Motion series. I am very delighted because it's fantastic to see such enthusiasm for events like this among many attendees, including students from GMU and other IGC universities. And that all of you have taken time out of your busy schedules to think about this issue, refugee, our unfounded fear. So congratulations to CSPS-Korea at George Mason University in that you are now holding successfully this event. I would like to extend my fullest appreciation in that CSPS is working alongside many experts in various sectors to address today's pressing security issues, ranging from conflicts and wars to non-traditional threats, including refugee crisis and climate change. I hope that today's events will be more productive because the issue of diversity and social inclusion have been one of the most important themes in this society. Our society has changed enormously in recent years. We live in an increasingly global world where different cultures, races, genders, and identities are even more closely connected. And the society should be progressing toward being a more diverse and inclusive one. As the CEO of the Incheon Global Campus Foundation, I hope to see our community advanced by becoming more capable of embracing diversity and working toward social inclusion. That is what courageous, creative, and compassionate leaders do. And I hope you will be those leaders in the future. I am convinced that today's event will be a good opportunity to move forward in this sense. And I will be making my best effort to support you to successfully achieving your great goal and vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu, for your wonderful remarks. Now, for our final order of the opening ceremony, we will have the concept note speech on today's topic by the Research Assistant of the Center for Security Policy Studies Korea, Ms. Sua Oh. Please welcome her to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to invite you here to the first Center for Security Policy Studies Korea Knowledge in Motion series. My name is Sua Oh, and it is a special honor to be the concept note speaker for this event. I, like yourselves, was an ordinary Korean university student who, despite being a global affairs student, had little interest nor formal knowledge about the refugee issues. However, the moment I was exposed to the breathtaking stories of the Syrian refugees through the documentary This Is Home, A Refugee Story, I never thought the same way since. I slowly grasped not only the severity of the global refugee issue, but the myriad of issues that refugees face as they are relocated across the opposite side of the globe. Realizing the massive value that this documentary held, I, with my colleagues at the CSPS-Korea, felt the urge to take this a step further and plan to host an event that aims to influence the minds of the next generation of Korea. Throughout the stages of developing the project, the main question we asked ourselves was why we fear refugees, as we face the reality of states shutting the doors in front of refugees and the fear of possible harm that has not yet occurred. Interestingly, even presented through the documentary, what most of us forget to realize is that refugees are simply in search of a new home. As stated by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings have the right to have a safe place to live. Nonetheless, despite this given human right, the issue of providing a new home seems to not be simple as guaranteed, as the ROK government has only accepted a mere 1% of the total number of refugees who apply for asylum to Korea. The challenge also exists in the societal realm, as the Yemeni refugee crisis in 2018 perfectly illustrates the perception in Korean society that the Korean society has towards refugees. 500 refugees who were suggested as illegally entering the country through the media were suddenly deemed as fake refugees and stirred an uproar of protests that petitioned for the abolition of the ROK refugee law. However, 3 years from the point of such contention, 400 Afghan refugees were welcomed by the ROK government at the Incheon airport, indicated as special contributors, which the government was later praised and acknowledged by foreign and domestic media by performing a miraculous operation. While both groups are pertain to the term refugees, by far it can be presumed that ROK government only welcomes outsiders or migrants that either bring straightforward economic benefits or are supportive to the country. In other words, the underlying element in tackling the refugee issue in Korea is undoubtedly fear. Let's take a look at a unique case in Korea, which are the North Korean defectors. Under the UNHCR definition, the North Korean defectors are considered as refugees. Yet ROK is annually accepting more than thousands of North Koreans. As a result of education about our common ethnic group from a young age, we are well aware of the reason why they come to seek a new home in South Korea. On the other hand, the degree of our awareness and knowledge of the global refugee crisis and the battles that refugees have to fight to having a safe home is questionable. With the lack of understanding of refugees, it is too easy for the public to be disordered and divided by the media's inaccurate information. Therefore, recognizing the current biases we hold in the Korean society, CSPS Korea assembles this event in an attempt to identify the unfounded fear that permeates through our society through answering 2 critical questions. In a few minutes, the first session opens the event with the screening of the documentary film, This Is Home, A Refugee Story, which shows the lives of Syrian refugees in their daily struggles in their new homes, which is the United States. Moving on to the second session titled Why We Fear, we invited 2 speakers who are experts in the areas of legal refugee issues and refugee policy research to dive into the core reasons that provoke our fear of the components we analyzed in session 1. Hence, through the 2 sessions, I want you to walk out the door with 2 questions. First, what is the genuine meaning of home in the modern era and the future? Second, if the meaning of what we perceive as home has changed or will change, how can we prepare and accommodate the paradigm shift? The Republic of Korea has undeniably arrived at a point of experiencing growing pains as we move from childhood to the adolescent stage. However, the global sphere is ever transforming at a rapid pace, inevitably impacting the very home we have perceived as such for more than centuries. It is certainly only a matter of time when more refugees are at the front door. Therefore, as future generations of South Korea, with confidence, I ask you to join the story and embark on the journey of creating a welcoming home, starting with the front door of Korea. Thank you.
Thank you for your informative outline on the topic of today's event. Now we shall begin session 1, What We Fear. We will start by watching This Is Home, a Refugee Story by Alexandra Shiva. The documentary follows the daily lives of Syrian refugees. They are adjusting to their new homes in Baltimore, Maryland, after being resettled by the United Nations. The Korean translation of the documentary was accomplished by the Student Fellows for the Center of Security Policy Studies, Korea. Following the screening, George Mason University Assistant Professor of Global Affairs, Dr. Yasemin Ipek, will join us through Zoom to provide a commentary of the documentary. Please enjoy the film. We will now invite Dr. Ipek for the commentary. I hope you're having a good morning in Turkey, Dr. Ipek. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Awesome, hello. The stage is now yours.
All right, thank you everyone. It's such a great honor and pleasure to be here. I owe gratitude to many people. First of all, to Nahee, who is my former student who took a class with me on refugees in spring 2019. I think she has a huge role in making this event possible. And then I want to thank to Dr. Jihye Lim and her research assistants Saihun Lee and Sua Oh for inviting me and organizing this wonderful event. And I want to thank everyone at Mason Korea who made this event possible. I'm very pleased to be here and to see that this is coming to reality. And thank you everyone for coming and being here. Again, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you. So the documentary movie you have just watched is an excellent choice for so many reasons. We have real stories, but these stories are not told only from a dramatic perspective. The movie invites us to understand problems of refugees, but it does this using the power of humor. So when we are about to cry, we find ourselves laughing. So I hope the movie helps you to better understand the journeys of refugee communities. We watched this movie with my students in my classes, and it allows us to have in-depth discussions on so many different issues related to refugees. Refugee issue continues to be a major global problem. It's estimated that globally forced displacement has surpassed 84 million in 2021. One of the problems that the movie invites us to think deeply about is anti-refugee policies and practices. And of course, the fear that accompanies these practices. I know some of you think that Korean society in particular has strong anti-refugee sentiments, but let me emphasize that such policies or sentiments are by no means limited to South Korea. Our current global context, as many researchers point out, criminalizes mobility of poor people. We have border regimes to control the movement of people from the global south and elaborate systems of security, policing, and incarceration to manage migrants and refugees. And in the movie, we see how this broader political context impacts the lives of refugees. For example, when Trump imposed the Muslim travel ban in 2016, many Syrian refugees and other refugee communities in the US were immediately impacted. So policies, laws, and what governments and international organizations do significantly impact refugees. But other mechanisms also cause otherization and dehumanization of refugees. Think about where we receive information about refugees. How do we form our opinions about refugees? How do we form our feelings about refugees? Politicians, policymakers, humanitarian agencies, the media, social media. Yes, refugees are often misrepresented by those sources, But also, in many cases, we learn about refugees from people we know and love, such as our parents, friends, and neighbors. So in addition to political landscape, I believe the cultural atmosphere also causes an anti-refugee outlook, and this was one of the messages of the movie as well. So why do we often have negative opinions for refugees? Most of the refugees are people of color from poor communities of the global south. So refugees are judged by the racial prejudices we already formed about those people even before they arrived at our countries. We think that we know them. We think they are lazy, they are coming to our country to steal our jobs and exploit our resources. The list of racial prejudices is different for every country, obviously, but I would really like to invite all of you to ask yourselves about what types of racial stereotypes you hold for different communities in different parts of the world. In addition to racism, refugees are also often experiencing Islamophobia. In the movie, we see how racism and Islamophobia intersect in the context of the US society. Often Muslims in different parts of the world are victims of racism and xenophobia at the same time. Increasingly after September 11, in the last 2 decades, Muslims are associated commonly with terrorism and evil. Research shows that common stereotypes regarding Muslims are they are backward, they are irrational, they are violent, they are resistant to change, they are fundamentalist and terrorist, and they are misogynist. So some of these prejudices shape the way we approach and think of refugees because we grow up thinking about these ideas and hearing these ideas from different sources, including our family members. Such prejudices are sometimes conscious. We believe that they are not stereotypes, but they are the truth. We really believe them. But often, these are very subconscious thoughts. You might have noticed that the movie invites us to reflect on these subconscious thoughts as well, not only our conscious thoughts. So think about the moments such as sharing an elevator with a young refugee woman who wears a hijab. Hijab is the Islamic headscarf. And there's a little kid in the elevator who fears from that young Syrian woman. This young Muslim Syrian woman feels terrible because she asks herself, how can I live safely at a place even a child fears from me without any reason? So this is an incredibly difficult situation. Most people around you fear from you for reasons that you have no role or responsibility. They are strangers, but you know and feel that they fear from you. Something similar was experienced by Asian communities in the US right in the aftermath of the COVID outbreak. I still remember that some of my Chinese and even Korean students at Mason complained to me about how they were harassed and even attacked by random people on the streets, because of the idea that they are causing COVID. We need to reflect on these issues. They are real problems. Why and how we fear from some people. So this is a deep question. Of course, it has psychological impacts, and I'm not a psychologist, but I believe that once we show the courage to talk about these issues, as we are doing today, I think there is hope. I also have the hope that learning more about refugees, Islam, and other cultures has the potential to help us overcome our fear and prejudices. So more we know and understand these groups we look at as the other or a threat, more we might begin to relate to them as human beings who have struggles like ours, but also more difficult struggles because they are trying to live in a place that is not very friendly to them. In addition to humanizing the refugees, the movie also has some important, hopeful messages. We see scenes of friendship, empathy, giving, and help. For instance, volunteering. Think about volunteering. Young college students volunteer for helping refugees to integrate. We see some white Christian groups helping to refugees. Many people in the host community genuinely try to become friends with and support refugees. So the movie gives us hope. However, the movie has a very important message in this regard about interacting with refugees. So we need to carefully listen to the ways refugees talk about their own experiences. It's crucial to give voice to refugees themselves. This is something we discuss a lot in my classes. So think about this scene in the movie where two female humanitarian workers treated Syrian refugee men poorly when these men missed their job opportunities. These two women refused to listen to the refugees. But we also had those humanitarian workers, other workers, who took the time to listen to the refugees and try to understand their conditions genuinely, in contrast to those others who basically don't care, and they try to strictly impose the rules on them. Obviously, rules are good. They are here to regulate our code of conduct. But at the same time, without listening the conditions of people, the rules are nonsense. So the movie invites us to think about how it is important to really listen and understand the refugees themselves and be more attentive to their value systems and struggles. Yes, some of their value systems may not correspond to what we believe as truth, but they come from that value system, and we need to understand and respect these value systems. So fear and prejudice prevent us from approaching the refugee issues from a productive angle. The movie focuses on the difficulties faced by refugees and asks us to pause our fear and instead try empathy. So think about trauma and psychological stress experienced by some of the refugees in the movie. There are some scenes about the devastation of the war, the destruction caused in infrastructures, but more importantly, how war continues to affect refugees, especially the children and teenagers. The scenes in the school and counseling services really touched me. And I watched this movie 3 times because we watched it with students, and each time I watched, I have specific emotions for these scenes in the school and counseling services. And we must remember that most refugees are coming from war zones. They do not prefer to move to stranger lands. So think about the themes of home and belonging, which we repeatedly hear in the movie, home and belonging. Refugees are in a new place, and they try to begin a new life. Of course, they miss Syria. They had never ever planned to move from Syria before the war broke out. I was personally in Syria before the war in 2010, and I was struck by how much many Syrians love their land. Yet the war, which is still going on after 10 years, has been devastating for millions of Syrians. So in one sense, yes, the Syrian refugees do not belong to the US that they arrived at, and they struggle with the fact that they do not belong. Think about how you feel when you travel to other countries, even as a tourist. It's a very stressful experience. So for Syrian refugees, most of whom were from working class communities, language, work, education, and many, many cultural norms, even like traffic lights, think about it, because some of them come from rural areas. These are big challenges. So the movie invites us to think about how stressful it is to be a refugee. As host country citizens, we usually focus on how bad or dangerous the refugees are for our economy or culture, but we rarely think how life is extremely difficult for the refugees themselves. And that's why I love this movie. It invites us to look at the picture from their angle. So in this regard, the movie gives us some guidelines regarding the issue of refugee integration. Language is a very important issue, as the movie discusses. We need mutual efforts about the language issue. And in this sense, let me quickly give you an example of Turkey, where I am from. Turkey hosts the largest number of Syrian refugees in the world. There are more than 3.6 million Syrians in Turkey. Most of them are already trying to learn the language of the host country. They are putting enormous effort into it. But unfortunately, we have many Turkish citizens who make a huge fuss about how refugees speak their own language in public spaces such as the metro and cafes, I keep asking myself, what is this fear about the people speaking different languages? Why do we fear from them? I know so many Turkish people who just get upset hearing people speak other languages. They feel threatened. Why? Think about this. Of course, we have this fear and such people in the US and other parts of the world as well. I remember when I was speaking Turkish, sometimes in the US, some people were bothered. I'm sure that some of you have a similar experience. So we have a lot of work to do for educating our communities and awareness raising. So I hope this movie and this event today serve as a baby step for this type of work. As I said earlier, we must be hopeful and positive that new generations in our communities, which is you, can find better ways to address our fear and prejudices for refugees. But an important step for achieving this, I believe, is to courageously and openly discuss our prejudices and fear for refugees, just like we are doing right now. I don't want to speak too long. Thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ipek, for your fascinating commentary on the movie. We have some extra time, so we will have many questions, hopefully, to ask you, and we look forward to hearing your answers. There are staff available around the theater with microphones, so at any point that you have questions, please feel free to raise your hands.
Oh, hi, this is Jihye Lim of Global Affairs at Ryun UK. So I want to ask about what critics do you have on how the U.S. handles refugees, perhaps in regard to how long they are supported or through what means they are supported?
Thank you so much, but I could not fully hear the question. Is there a way to repeat it, or can someone maybe rephrase it? I couldn't fully hear it, I'm sorry. I just heard refugees and support, but I didn't hear the full question.
I can repeat the question.
Sure, thank you.
I believe she asked, do you have any critiques on how the United States handles the acceptance and dealing with refugees, perhaps in regards to how long they're supported or the methods in which they're supported?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I think definitely similar to what the movie is giving us the message. And also, like in my courses with students, we visit the refugee agencies and centers in the local area as well, as Mason at Fairfax is close to some of those refugee centers. Actually, to the center in the movie that we are close as well, it's 1 hour from us. So one thing that these people working in humanitarian agencies complain is that the number of refugees received and accepted by the US is extremely slim. It's a very low number of people. And then I think the movie says something like 20,000 at that time. And then after Trump administration, this number literally stopped. Like the Muslim ban and the larger immigration policies stopped the acceptance of refugees. Recently, the US accepted some number of Afghani refugees, but even that number is very slim. So one major problem is the number of refugees that are, and refugee, remember, is a spatial legal category. It's different from migrant and other groups of people. So the first major problem is the number of refugees that are accepted to the US compared to many countries in the region, such as Lebanon and Turkey and Jordan. The number is really small. The only Western country that accepted good number of Syrian refugees is Germany. Germany, during the time of Merkel, accepted 1 million Syrian refugees, which is the largest number in the Western Hemisphere. So first is the number, and second is, as you see in the movie, there's this expectation of quick adaptation to the society. They are given only 8 months to become entirely self-sufficient, which is, by the way, a very US value. You're in a stranger land, you don't know anyone, you have to be self-sufficient, you have to have a job, you have to, know how to navigate the social and cultural atmosphere only in 8 months. So even with the low number of accepted refugees, the administration of their integration process has a lot of problems. The time given to them, the material support and other issues, there are some problems. Yeah, but this is a really important question. There are a lot of advocacy groups pressuring US government for accepting more number of refugees and also for offering more resources and benefits to refugee communities who already exist in the US. But so far with the new administration, there aren't many successful adaptations of these policies. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. It's interesting how when you talk about in your discussion about the commentary of the film, you mentioned prejudice and hate coming from people. And even then in your answer to your question, you also mention it. So I ask, do you find the need for that prejudice and hate to be removed from people first or from the government, or is it a joint things that happen at the same time for this kind of culture to change?
Yeah, thank you so much. Are you specifically asking about the cause or how this could be resolved? Which one?
How this could be resolved?
I think it should come from both sources. I think focusing only on one of them would not impact the solution. But that does not mean that each of us personally have to wait for our governments to initiate for a refugee policy. So I believe a long-term sustainable solution would definitely can come from raising awareness and these types of activities, educational forums and activities on the citizen level. But at the same time, laws and policies and the broader attitude of the governments and organizations and influential actors, even movie stars and influential people of influence, I think do matter in these issues. So I wouldn't say like one of them should be highlighted. I believe all of the actors, different institutions and government policies should work in tandem to struggle with the widespread fear. And there are of course always those specific extreme groups like who are disseminating hate-mongering ideas. And I do think, including the US and in other parts of the world, the government should be kind of more strict with such groups who are, under the name of the free speech, disseminating those fear-mongering ideas about other groups and including refugees and Muslim groups. I think this is also important. So I am in favor of a multidimensional solution, but also as individuals, really, we should not wait for others to take action. And again, think about what you guys are doing there. Think about what Nahee did, trying to, initiate this kind of thing, and then how each of you have been contributing, and you are here and listening to this and maybe thinking about, oh, maybe I can do something for this. What can I do? Can I go and talk to some people in my family? Can I go and write a blog on social media or do something? So I also believe each of us have something to do before our governments take more firm action. This is what I believe.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Professor, my name is Jihye Lim. I also studied in global affairs major. My question is, at the end of the day, what about Korean people take away from this documentary?
Great question, but I really think this the answer to this question can come from you, right? And you live in Korea. I have never been to Korea, and I have some messages as I had in my commentary, but really at the end of the day, it's you. I mean, since you asked the question, what do you think that the group here needs to take away from the documentary? You tell me your idea and I will contribute.
Well, I think most Korean people do not think heavily about refugee problem. But yeah, so that's the reason why I ask you about the question, because many people do not consider about this problem, and so I do not want to get some advice or some kind of advice from you, because we're not highly considered about this problem. And yeah, and sometimes I have seen some people who think about accepting refugees is not helpful, and they could undermine the economy or some kind of the overall country. So here's the question: what do you think about how South Korean government to deal with the refugee problem in South Korea?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, these are really thoughtful reflections. I really appreciate that you shared them with us here. And now I have two questions. First, like the Korean society, and then the Korean government, which are both difficult questions. And I'm sure there are other people who are reflecting on these questions. So in relation to the movie, your first question, so I think even just caring about the issue and start thinking about the issue and talking it with other people, even for instance, encouraging your professors in different classes to add maybe even 1 or 2 weeks discussion about the refugee issue. These are important steps to create a space for discussing refugees, to creating a presence for them. So I think that's a really important step, like the fact that this event is happening, but also in the larger campus. Like for instance, for GLOW 101, I spent 2 weeks discussing the issues of refugees and migrants. And it's not required, but I'm doing it because I think it's one of the major global problems. And we can do the same with our different courses as well. We can create spaces in our courses, but also in extracurricular activities like this to discuss these issues. As students, you can create student clubs in which you struggle with xenophobia, discrimination. It doesn't have to be, the club doesn't have to be on refugees specifically. It can be broadly about discrimination or otherization. Because Korean society is a very homogeneous society, broadly speaking. So these are some of the specific ideas, but I do really believe young people can come up with different ways. But the general idea, the gist here is raising awareness, creating awareness, and trying to reach out to wider groups as possible. Use social media to create awareness about refugees. Yes, I mean, you are right, definitely. There isn't much awareness, and the people who have some idea, who think about refugees, usually they think in negative terms. So what we can do here is, I think, as people watching these types of movies and trying to look at the issue from a different angle, which is a pro-refugee angle, I think you can build platforms to reach out to wider groups of people. But it can be even as simple as like, you go back to home today and you suggested some of your friends and family members, hey, here is this great movie, would you like to watch it? It's really interesting. So this is even a baby step. And in terms of the Korean government, I mean, I would kind of be cautious about giving advice to governments in general because this is such a big issue. But we must remember that it's the challenge of many countries and governments, especially more so after COVID, to impose strict restrictions on mobility of communities. So that's not to excuse any government, but unfortunately, the political climate globally is maybe some of you are watching what is happening in the border of Belarus, Europe right now. Thousands of migrants and refugees right now we are watching is struggling with the cold and difficult conditions. many countries, so it's not a Korea problem. I made it clear in my speech, and I want to re-emphasize it. So this is not a Korea problem. Maybe you feel it even more in Korea, but this is a global problem. Another solution for me is to do advocacy, to pressure your government through whatever local resources available to them. I'm not very familiar with the political system in Korea, for instance. In the US, citizens write letters to their senators, they go to protests, whatever forms of legitimate political expression you can use in Korea to pressure the government to take action, that would be helpful. You can use civil society platforms, you can use different advocacy platforms. But yes, definitely, I think we would all agree that all governments should have more open border policies and should accept more number of refugees from different countries. But unfortunately, they need to be pressured. I think without a certain pressure coming from citizens and civil society, this will not happen. I mean, we need to be realistic. I mean, there won't be any government just, okay, that's a great idea, let's do this. They need our pressure, and the young generation are here to pressure the governments, of course, for the benefit of the society.
Thank you once again, Dr. Ipek. Do we have any more questions from the audience? We have about 10 minutes left for the Q&A. Right there, Carissa.
Hello, I'm Carissa Hilton. I'm also a global affairs major. My question is, how long do you think the government should support refugees, and what resources and aid do you think should be provided?
Thank you so much. Another excellent question. I'm fascinated about really the thoughtful questions I'm receiving here. It's a great pleasure. So this is a really important question. So one thing that we as scholars or researchers of humanitarianism or refugee problems typically argue based on our interaction with refugee communities or on-the-ground observations, unfortunately there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Typically we wanna have these one-size-fits-all solutions, but the reality is complicated. So the answer to your question is, ideally, in terms of the first part of your question, how long refugees need should be given for integration to the host country. I mean, in the movie it's 8 months. I would say ideally, we need to have enough resources to be able to determine the need based on each specific case. So for one family, it might be 6 months. For another family, it can be 12 months. So one size fits all solutions. This is usually the mentality of humanitarian organizations. But unfortunately, researchers show from different African countries, Middle East, Europe, they don't work. Because as you see in the movie, there are different refugee portraits, right? There is the problem of disability. I mean, someone with a disability problem would need much more time for effective integration, even with the job. So first, we need to trust that refugee communities, like it's also about our assumptions about those communities. Oh, they are lazy. If we give them endless time, they will take advantage of the system and they will live here forever without finding a job. I mean, trust me, almost everyone wants to find a job, wants to adopt. Like, this is one of the messages of the movie. Those people want to integrate, want to become like us, and live a normal life more than we want for them, right? They want it. But certain situations, such as language, such as cultural norms, such as other issues, make it difficult for them. So we need to trust that they want it. But second, that maybe each specific circumstance require a different time. So maybe ideally a humanitarian organization or a government, that's the decision by the government, can have a framework, something like, between 6 months and 1 year, depending on the circumstances, and these circumstances can be highlighted. So this way we can have, if we have a time frame instead of a strict deadline, or maybe we can add a clause to these rules, such as like, oh, in such and such circumstances, this period can be extended for extra three months. I mean, in our institutions, when something unexpected happens, we have extensions of a couple of months to provide more, humane frameworks for our work environments. So I think we can provide more, humane frameworks in these circumstances. So I would say something between 6 months to 12 months, but then additional clause of like maybe 3 months of extra extension can be helpful. Because again, I do think that it depends on the specific circumstance, it depends on gender, it depends on religion, where you are, and also what is happening to you. In some neighborhoods, people are more welcome, refugees are more welcome, and the neighbors are more friendly. In some others, they could be threatened. And imagine that you are trying to integrate to a place in which your neighbors are threatening you, are making you feel unsafe. So I do believe specific case circumstances need to be taken into account. And in terms of other resources, one thing I like in the movie is those people who know the language of the host communities, and this creates a huge situation. When they have volunteers who have no Arabic, and the situation and the scene becomes so difficult to deal with. So this is something important. They can hire more people, they can employ more volunteers who know the language of those people. This makes a huge difference, and they can train their volunteers and workers more. So I would say if governments or local if governments and other local actors, politicians can support more humanitarian organizations. Humanitarian organizations' resources are also limited. We have to acknowledge this. So more resources should be transferred to humanitarian organizations and agencies like the ones in the movie, and they need to invest more on the resources such as people that would spare time to the refugees. Think about that scene. I don't know if you have noticed, but even when the doctor was filling a form for a refugee visiting him, he just had to be quick. Like there's a time which is like, oh, I have 5 minutes for each, something like that. It may not be 5 minutes exactly, but certain rules are very strict. Due to limited resources, sometimes they need to spend much less time, such as doctors and teachers, than they need to spend for those resources. So that's a great question because, yes, investing in more resources such as health benefits, such as counseling services, such as educational resources, follow-up people, because the movie shows us the problems are multifaceted. I mean, when refugees are trying to integrate, yes, it's difficult. I mean, this is such a laborious process, but I think it's worth it because we also need to acknowledge that it's not out of pity that we should be helping those people. The research shows in the long run, that's for Western countries. I'm not sure about the different Asian countries, but for the Western societies, research shows in the long run, refugee and migrant communities actually significantly contribute to the economy and the culture of the host society. So we need to keep in mind, maybe initially, that there's a lot of money being spent, maybe there's a lot of resources, maybe there's some challenge for about a year or so, but in the long run, there are also a lot of benefits. So the movie doesn't discuss these benefits, but I want to call your attention to the long run. Also think about what would happen if significant number of refugees are accepted to the Korean society, to major cities. How would this transform our society in the long run in positive ways? Like we all focus on negative ways, but I also invite you to think about the positive ways. And positive ways, it's not only about economy, it's also about the cultural interaction. I mean, cultural interaction between different communities, I always believe is a rewarding experience. That's what the American dream in some ways is about. So yes, we need more resources, but we also need to believe that such an investment at the initial stage is worth it in the long run. And please do think about the different benefits of hosting refugees, because I don't want people to think, oh, we have pity, I have compassion, this is why we need to have refugees. Like, the refugee and migrants bring lots of benefits to our societies as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ipek. I believe that's all we have time for questions, as our time for lunch is coming closer. We would like to thank you once again for your insightful commentary and for joining us at such an early time in Turkey this morning. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Dr. Ipek.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed being here, and I love your questions. I want to thank to you all once again, and I want you to please feel free to contact me if you want to discuss anything further. If you want to have further questions, I will always be happy to receive questions about these issues. So have a great time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.